right. Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for those who have joined us this morning. Courtney Dunkerton and I are really excited to talk to you today about building sustainable community connectivity through collaboration. Just a few things before we get started. At the bottom of your screen, you should have the option to raise your hand, and that will let us as panelists see if someone's raising their hand, and you can do that if you have a comment or a question. Also, please feel free just to add anything in the chat section, and we will try to keep our eyes on that. If you want to go to just the panelists, there's an option for that if you have a specific question, or you can click panelists and all attendees, and that would allow everyone who's joining our conversation today to see what you have to say. The North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault is an inclusive statewide alliance working to end sexual violence through education, advocacy, and legislation. So sexual violence includes human trafficking within the sex trades, child sexual exploitation, and sexual harassment and assault that is part of force or coercion in human trafficking. And NC CASA has been engaged in anti-trafficking, human trafficking work since 2004. NC CASA as a statewide coalition uses a social justice framework, and we try to do our work from a strong intersectional social justice perspective. We know that when we do not center marginalized communities, that their needs are not met and their voices are not heard. So we do our best to center our work around marginalized communities and their experience so that everyone is served. At NC CASA, our education, advocacy, and legislation work, we engage in work opportunities such as organizing and sponsoring statewide trainings related to sexual violence, supporting rape crisis programs, resource sharing and technical assistance, promoting legislative agendas and policy change at both the local and national level. We do anti-human trafficking outreach, prevention education, and we work closely with colleges and universities. At the beginning of our trainings, we like to acknowledge that not all women are victims, not all men are perpetrators, and any gender can be a victim or can be a perpetrator. We know that this is true for sexual violence work and human trafficking work, and we want our work to be inclusive, and we want to make sure that people do not feel invisible or underrepresented, and that we don't leave anyone behind in our work. Here's a brief table of what we're going to cover today. So we'll talk about how this training came about, really taking the time to think about how you collaborate with others in your work. What is collaboration? Why do we collaborate and how do we do it? And we'll go through tips and recommendations and positive features of collaborative partnerships. Before we begin, if everyone just wants to take a second to write in the chat, introduce yourself, your pronouns, what kind of agency do you work for or with, and what is your role in that agency, and where's your agency located? And make sure that if you're doing so, you do all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your response. We're going to keep going, but if anyone can feel welcome to introduce themselves throughout these first few slides as we introduce what we're going to be speaking about today and introduce both Courtney and I.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Courtney Dunkerton. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the anti-human trafficking specialist, and I've been with NC CASA about 1.5 years. Prior to that, I've done some volunteer work in the community, and then co-founded and directed a nonprofit that was focused on human trafficking, victim service, and advocacy. I've been a conference speaker and a guest lecturer at universities and colleges. I have experience as a child forensic interviewer, and I co-authored Equipping Rape Crisis Centers to Serve Survivors of Human Trafficking. I currently am the coordinator for the regional response team for NCCOT, and as in my role here with NC CASA, I'm a trainer and technical assistance provider to member programs and state coalitions. That's some of the things that I do. So glad to be with you this morning.
And my name is Madison Van Epps, and my pronouns are she, hers. I graduated from the University of Michigan in 2019 with my BA in Community and Global Health, and I'm now about to graduate in May from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill with my Master of Public Health in Maternal, Child, and Family Health. I am doing work this semester with NC CASA, doing a handful of trainings related to work that I did over the summer, which I'll go into detail in a little bit. I just submitted my thesis this last weekend, which was a literature review looking at the impact of social media consumption on the body-related esteem of adolescent girls in the United States. And I am now looking for jobs, which is really exciting, and excited to see what happens after I graduate. To identify the need and to talk a little bit about the work I've done previously with NC CASA. In 2015, the North Carolina General Legislature passed Session Law 2015-279, which mandated the inclusion of sex trafficking prevention education and reproductive health education in North Carolina schools. Here I've included the exact language that was utilized in the mandate. So the mandate required that the prevention curriculum teach about sex trafficking prevention and awareness. Each local school administration shall collaborate with a diverse group of outside consultants where practical, including law enforcement with expertise in sex trafficking prevention education, and collaborate with a diverse group of outside consultants, including law enforcement, for a referral protocol for high-risk pupils and minors. And in that, the material shall be age appropriate. The information during the instruction shall be objective and based upon scientific research that is peer reviewed and accepted by professionals and experts in the field of sexual health education. And again, law enforcement agencies, criminal justice agencies, and non-governmental organizations with expertise in sex trafficking prevention and awareness may also provide materials and information. And so in short, this mandate required that materials be age appropriate and peer reviewed, but for the focus of today's conversation, looking at the sections that say that they recommend or mandate that there is collaborative nature of the prevention education. So that whether that be with law enforcement agencies, criminal justice agencies, and non-governmental organizations and their role in this collaboration. And so this mandate highlighted some potential barriers to implementation of the prevention curriculum, such as how will schools find a trafficking prevention curriculum, how to identify which curriculum of the many that exist would be best for their district, would it be peer reviewed or age appropriate depending on where they're planning to implement in what schools. And so I created, with the help of Chris Proft at NC CASA, the Human Trafficking Prevention Curriculum Matrix. And this is a tool that outlines 14 different human trafficking prevention curriculums that can be used within North Carolina schools. It breaks down each curriculum by the logistics, so whether it costs to implement, whether it needs collaboration with trainers, it has to be taught by law enforcement. It breaks down the content. So maybe does it discuss this, does it discuss healthy relationships or relationship red flags? And then the last section is asking about known risk and protective factors for sex trafficking. And so it allows schools to look at each curriculum and see which one best fits their need based on the criteria that they've set themselves for their district. In creating this matrix and understanding the language of the mandate, we recognize that schools may not know or may need help with identifying sustainable collaboration. But in the anti-human trafficking movement, it's not only schools that may need help identifying collaboration strategies, it's all organizations that have a stake in human trafficking prevention. And so that's how we came up with today's topic for today's conversation. And we think it's really important in creating sustainable change and prevention work.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Madison. That was a really great background and why we're having this training today. This is going to be specific application to those who are interested in collaborating on prevention, but it also has applications to the broader human trafficking network, and also anyone that's doing work where collaboration is necessary. So I do want you all to feel free to ask questions, raise your hand. We want this to be meaningful to you and helpful in where you are. I'm really glad to see someone from police department in Cumberland County. That is really awesome. I'm really excited that you are here. You're going to add some richness to this discussion. And this is just, the first part is really an intent to cast a vision for more effective collaboration to foster that sustainability in prevention and response to human trafficking. So there's going to be a lot of ideas to consider. My hope is that you're not overwhelmed, but you're inspired to think of one or two ways you can bring this back to your agency and start implementing some of these things. So just encourage you not to be overwhelmed. And also acknowledging those who are receiving this training right now may not feel that you're in a position where you have much power to make decisions or to make change. And I hope throughout this training that you can take away a couple of ideas and recommendations that you feel like you can do that where you are in your agency. So next slide. So today we're going to just break this topic down by simply asking the question, what is collaboration, why it's important, and how do we create these partnerships? We're going to begin again by addressing some broad concepts, and as we go, we will get more specific. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to pose a question to you. I'm not going to ask you to share any answers, but this is a question that may give you some insight how well you collaborate with others. So maybe you want to write it down for your own. Maybe you haven't thought about this question in a while. So what motivates or inspires or lights a fire within you in the work that you're doing? If you could just take a few seconds to think about that. You know, when you started out, maybe you were more ready to answer this question. And it's always a good one to ask periodically. So what motivates you? What got you started? And then what feels threatening or what deflates you in this work? What about the work that's causing you burnout? And you might say everything, and that's completely understandable. So just take a couple of seconds to write that down. And so I asked the question because how effectively we collaborate with others may impact a lot about how we feel about the work. Whatever your work may be. So for instance, if you feel alone in the work, if you feel like it all depends on you, I would pose that collaborating well with others can affect that positively. That can, so collaboration is more than just victim services or service to survivors, right? It really does help us in the work. So think about that as we go as a motivation. All right, next slide. So we're gonna dive into the what. Next slide. So what is collaboration? What are we talking about here? Here's the definition. It's when a group of people come together and contribute their expertise for the mission, for the benefit of a shared objective project or mission. So collaboration is not a technical concept. It's basically working together with others, right? It's sharing the load. It's spreading out a division of labor, in a sense, a division of services. It is more than an MOU, right? It's more than a contract. It's more than ink on paper. We have to do those things every time grants come around. We have to submit those MOUs to show that we're working with people. We use the word all the time. We need to show how we're collaborating when we're writing those grants, but how are we really doing it, right? So we know effective collaboration is going to be more than that MOU. It should be meaningful. It should have impact. It should be inclusive. Collaboration is not having a group of people that you dictate to, right? It's not treating everyone like your staff. It's not expecting everyone to follow your protocol, your lead, your goals and objectives. Sadly, that is how some kinds of so-called collaborative partnerships work. But we're talking about a collective impact for good, right? The combining of effort can be greater than the total sum of that effort. And that's something interesting to think about. So when we're working together, in other words, more is generated in teamwork than just the sum total of the work. There is real emotional and mental benefits when we work together. And that kind of goes back to that initial question about what inspires you in the work. So, and that's a motivation as well. Next slide. All right, so why is collaboration important? Well, here's some things. I love this puzzle imagery because it shows the connection of all these ideas. And some of them are similar, and it's definitely not exhaustive. So you could add some ideas as well. But here are some thoughts to get us thinking about ways we can build our collaborative partnerships. It's important because there is a complexity in human trafficking, prevention, and intervention work. And a couple of ideas. First, as many as you may know, human trafficking is a very broad topic. It involves a lot of different activity. It involves many, many different agencies, organizations, different demographics of survivors. It's included in a lot of different industries, right? So it's just very complex. It involves a community to respond properly, right? The survivor often needs many, many different supports and services. It's also complex because right now, especially in North Carolina, it involves various understandings of prevention and response. People have very different views about what prevention is. Not everyone comes from a primary prevention perspective, right? And people have many different views of how to respond to survivors. So collaboration is really important because of that. Sustainability, you've heard the term, don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? So one thing we've seen a lot in North Carolina, and I know this is experienced across the nation in some of the coalitions I've talked to, is organizations that are no longer funded and they have to close shop, and they are no longer there for survivors, and other agencies in that region are kind of left holding the bag, and they aren't really, don't particularly have the capacity at the time to pick up the slack. So we want to address the sustainability. There's staff turnover, there's differences in capacity. So that's why collaboration is important. Better service delivery. That's, ultimately we want survivors to be served well. And when we collaborate, we are able to provide more options. A survivor will have the input of more expertise, more funding sources. The work will be more efficient and will promote inclusivity. Accountability is important for this work. When we collaborate, others see your work. Others can comment and provide feedback on the work that you do. And it helps us to stay in our lane. If more people are at the table working together, we can work on what we are truly supposed to be bringing to the table. Effective collaboration alleviates burnout. It doesn't all depend on you. It doesn't all depend on your agency. When we're sharing the work, we're able to leverage that, right? And also, again, there is that emotional, mental benefit from working together and sharing the load and sharing responsibilities or sharing services, sharing resources. And this is kind of similar to what we've been talking about. We can better leverage our resources. We can play to our strengths. And especially where agencies will have various levels of capacity, we can provide resources in that, in the lack of resources in other places. Agencies that are going through changes, that are just starting, that are still, their staff is still onboarding. This really helps as well. It also contributes to a coordinated community response. So in other words, when more organizations are involved and they're trained and they have buy-in, this is going to help that knowledge to be spread throughout a community, that understanding of trauma-informed service to survivors. The knowledge is institutionalized in the community. It's not just with one organization. So the community partners understand what the role everyone can play. And that really does, you can't have a coordinated community response when one agency is doing the work, right? This also alleviates a rescue complex. So agencies can focus on emergent needs, and a lot of HT organizations are really focused on that first 72 hours of identification of a human trafficking survivor. But when others are involved, you can bring in people whose work is more geared to transitional services or longer term needs, such as legal needs and mental health needs. And this can really help as well. And then another reason why collaboration is important, because it helps us engage from a public health approach. So when many people are engaged and involved, community partners will see beyond those individual risk factors. They'll see the community risk factors and the other kinds of risk and protective factors. And instead of just training on it, that yes, this is a thing we should do, people have a stake in the issue, right? And so as a community, we're more able to see the different ways trafficking involves all those risk and protective factors. So I hope that is helpful. It was helpful to me in putting together that slide and thinking through some of these things. And let us know if you have questions as we go along. So next slide. So I'm going to ask another question to help us get to thinking where we need to build. So if you think about a story or an example where you have experienced where collaboration was most successful, if you think back on a situation where like that was just a really great example of working together as a community or as a region. And then when did you know the collaboration was successful? And people have different perspectives of this, but it's helpful to ask that question. It doesn't always mean that everything is everybody lives happily ever after. We know that healing is a journey, and we're not always seeing survivors and get what they really hope to achieve. So but we can still collaborate well as a community. So if you just think about one example where you did feel that this was successful, I can give an example from the work that I did. There was we were with my organization, we were presenting in schools, and one of the principals that I talked to was kind of complaining because of all these organizations that are coming into the schools, the domestic violence organization, the rape crisis center, and some other groups are all trying to get in. We don't have time for all these organizations. So what we did is those three organizations, my human trafficking organization, the DV, and the rape crisis center, and also had a child advocacy center, got together, and we had a meeting, those of us who were bringing that community education, and we collaborate on what each organization was doing, what grade that they were trying to reach, and we put together a document that we would then present to the principals in the county to show that this is what we're doing, this is where we're working together. And that was just a really great example of pulling together our strengths and collaborating well. And we had some issues to work out because some of the grades, we were trying to do the same grades, and we had some good dialogue from that. And that's part of collaborating, right? So that's one example. And maybe you have your own as well. Next slide. So why is collaboration important? Another thing to consider, what is the cost of not collaborating? Well, here are some thoughts. It limits options that a survivor has. If they're only working with one agency, there's only have those options that the agency can provide. It can create dependency on one organization instead of empowering survivors. And as we mentioned before, when capacity suffers, the survivors are not served, especially when the organization collapses or has to close down. When staff turnover is high due to trauma, organizational trauma or burnout, that can harm survivors as well. And we know when we're working out of burnout, we're not able to deliver that compassionate care that we should be. So effective collaboration does alleviate those things. And when collaboration is not happening, it may be because of the reasons here. It's hard. It takes time. It takes forethought. And when we're in constant crisis mode, when we are doing our work in crisis, that's not how we build collaborative partnerships. This is outside of crisis. It takes patience. It takes working with people and agencies that we may not like or agree with, or we had a bad we have not a great history with them. It has to be strategic, and that takes time. It's also relationship based. Again, it's not just an MOU. You have to build those relationships, and that takes time. That takes time outside of meetings, and it takes initiative, and it also must be nurtured. So when we build those partnerships, it can't just be one person in the agency that we work with, because they can get promoted or go away, right? We need to be constantly building that partnership with the agency and as many people in the agency as possible. And it might not be everyone's strength. We do understand that. The other thing is you may not have a supportive ED or supervisor. So that's an issue as well, or they just may not prioritize building that partnership. But everyone in every level can do something to improve the relationship with the people that you're working with, right? And to include other people. It just might be more informal, and everyone can do that. But those are some things, the reasons that collaboration may not be happening. Next slide, please. So I wanted to, as we begin to address the how, I'd like to offer some initial commentary on the challenges to collaboration, the current anti-human trafficking movement in North Carolina, and that's very specific. I acknowledge this as someone who is practicing love and accountability, and I come from this movement. I'm still in it, and I've contributed to the things on this list. So I'm not coming as an outsider talking at people on the inside. I'm coming as someone who has been part of this movement, and these are just a few things I wanted to offer. One of the challenges is that the movement can experience a limited vision, especially when it comes to working with rape crisis centers. The movement tends to only work with those who have the HT label, who have been trained or coming from the perspective of that network, right, of that community. And that leaves a lot of people out. Anyone outside of the HT specific network can be, is sort of it's not like a club mentality, But the idea is if you haven't been trained specifically, you're not going to really be able to serve survivors. So that is one of the reasons. And then there's just a tendency to expect others to come to the human trafficking table instead of those in HT work going to other people's table, if that makes sense. So yeah, so that's an issue. And then there tends to be a priority of quantity over quality. So number of people trained instead of really making a deep impact in our training. So number of survivors served over the quality of that service, or just focusing on the first 72 hours of identification and not really putting the time and the effort into creating better alternatives for survivors that aren't in that immediate crisis time. And there's a tendency towards ownership of the work, ownership of a territory. And this comes from, in my opinion, this comes from the fact that human trafficking movement did not begin as a survivor-led movement. And I think we're seeing some of the impacts of that history show up. And hopefully we're moving beyond that. The other reason is some may view human trafficking work as too specialized. And this is seen sometimes in rape crisis centers or in domestic violence agencies, where they're saying we can't serve survivors because we don't know anything about human trafficking. And that might be because the movement has told them that, right? That's the message they've received, but it may not be the case. People are sometimes they view human trafficking as scary. They think people who've been sex trafficked are inherently dangerous and they don't want them in their shelters. They're afraid, they're just afraid of a lot of different things. And there are dynamics of human trafficking that are important to understand, particularly, like, for instance, if someone is trafficked in the commercial sex industry, there are important things to understand, but it shouldn't keep agencies from serving survivors because they're afraid. And so sometimes people have backed away from it because they're thinking that I have to have all this training and I have to have all this knowledge. When someone's fleeing an abusive partnership, they're fleeing an abusive partnership. Whether they're a human trafficking survivor or not does not change their current needs. When they say they've been raped, right? We don't have to know everything about human trafficking to serve a survivor who says they've been raped. So those are some examples. And again, I think we're moving past this, but it is still a thing. And then isolation, centering their own work and not supporting other people's work. So just having this exclusive, isolated human trafficking work that's not really supporting or seeing other people's work in the others' agencies. And another thing I wanted to mention, kind of along with the limited vision, isolation, is the movement is not inclusive enough. There are not marginalized and impacted populations that have a seat at the table. It centers white, cis women who are often from faith-based communities, and nothing against faith-based communities, but that is going to have a specific outcome. And also, this is a movement that favors criminal justice response and doesn't take into account historically marginalized populations who have been oppressed by those systems. And again, I think this goes back to where the movement came from. It wasn't survivor-led. It was concerned people seeing a problem and responding to it with the information that they had at the time. And, while noble, it's very incomplete in the understanding of these impacted populations. So we have a lot of ways to go on that front. So, are there any questions so far? I know I've kind of gone fast. Nope. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. So now we're going to get a little bit more specific. So kind of jumping out of the abstract, diving into a little bit more specific information. So some types and natures of collaborative partnerships. I wanted to just, some of these, you can be involved in many different types of collaborative partnerships, right? And that can help. You might be involved in different kinds of, and individual counties and regions will have several. So some of them will be formal, and in that they may be grant specific. And those can be great because they give you opportunities. Your agency is invited because someone wrote a grant and they need this many people, sort of a multidisciplinary team, and you're invited. That's a great opportunity, but it can be a little frustrating, especially if the only reason they got that, they're doing that is to get that money, right? So it may feel forced and it may feel insincere. And they have to create an MD team. The problem with that too is if there's other people in the county that's doing grants, everyone's having to form their own MD team, which means more meetings, more protocols, and that can be good, but it can also be frustrating because, you know, we all need more meetings, especially when there's a county or region that already has several MD teams already addressing different things. This formal partnership can be very strategic, like in a task force, when it is the mission is investigations and prosecutions. So that is a very specific formal partnership where you have certain people at the table. It can be where you have a shared mission or vision. For instance, anti-violence agencies coming together and talking about these things, where, for instance, human trafficking will cover lots of things. It will cover domestic or partner violence. It will cover rape crisis. It will cover, you know, mental health issues. So, or like in a family justice center and the agencies represented there, that's an example of having a shared mission or vision of anti-violence. Other examples will be your sexual assault response team, will be multidisciplinary teams, say in a child advocacy center, and regional or rapid response teams in HT work. Informal partnerships, you're going to have those. They may be regional, they may be community specific, and this just the place where you work, the county where you work. For instance, Cumberland County, an HT organization or an organization is going to be supportive of other things. It's going to be supportive of the Rotary Club, the schools, you know, the business community, right? And because you live there, you're going to be supportive. You're going to have networks. The Chamber of Commerce, I'm thinking of the funding agencies, it's escaping me. But anyway, so because you live there, you're going to be supportive, and good collaboration does involve being aware and supportive of the other things going on in your community. And that is going to help you. It's going to open doors for you when you're, you know, if you have a social media account and you're supportive and sharing, you know, food drives, other things that are going on, other fundraisers in the community, and you're known as someone who is part of that. So that's really important as well. And this can be, you can also just have some referral networks, service networks you may not have a formal MOU with, but this is your list of people that you call when you need things around this particular issue. And you may have networks that have people that have like and unlike roles and goals, just different people. So, and that hopefully can be encouraging. Sometimes we can be frustrated if we don't have that really tight partnership, but we have different networks, right? And then maybe we see people in those networks that we really do need to we need to get closer with and be more involved in a more meaningful way. So next slide. Okay. At this point, I would like to ask you all, are any of the things that I've mentioned so far things that you've experienced, any kind of networks that you're involved in? If you want to share in the chat, you can just add some things. For instance, are you part of a task force? Are you part of a review team? Let's see what people share. And if not, you can keep sharing. We'll go ahead. So now we're going to talk about some specific ways to build community connectivity, and we're going to get more specific, and it would be great if you all had some questions or thoughts that you like to share. And if you want to talk about a specific situation that you have a question or concern about, that would be great. So let's go to the next slide. So first of all, kind of taking everything that we've been going over, we want to assess where you are as far as your collaborative partnerships and where you want to go. So I want you to start thinking of specifics. And one resource tool, excuse me, that's very helpful is this, it's called a Smarty resource tool. And I would encourage you to print it out and take a look at it. It asks you to share things that are goals that are specific, that are measurable, that are achievable and realistic, that are timely and inclusive and equitable. So this helps us go beyond just surface changes that we want to make. This is a really great way to keep you on track for achieving these things. And if we use this kind of tool in a regular manner, it will really help you when in applying for grants. So take a look at that. And even if you don't fill it out, just reading through it and keeping that in your mind really does help. It alleviates some a little bit of feeling overwhelmed when we need to make some changes. Excuse me. And then we want to think about identify your service gaps or representation gaps. So what services for survivors need to be added, need to be improved on? What groups are not being represented well? If, for instance, if you have a, if you know that you have Spanish interpretations readily on hand, interpreters, but you know that there's a lot of Mandarin speakers in your community and it's very, very difficult to get a Mandarin interpreter. If you know that, then that's one of the things you really need to bring someone to the table, a Mandarin speaking person, someone familiar with the community. Definitely providing services around Mandarin speaking communities, but also bring them to the table. And so that's one example. And if we only think about it during crisis response, what are the things you think of during crisis response? You're like, man, we really need to beef up this service, or wow, we really do need this service. So think about when you're in that crisis response and you're wishing you had something, that's your gap, right? That's what you need to add. And do you want this network to be local? Do you want a regional reach? Do you want statewide? Do you want national? Think about that. And that's really important too. So for instance, if you need your immediate, community responders at the table, but then there's some statewide partnerships that you could really benefit from, that's what you want to think about. And I saw something in the chat. Thank you for sharing. Is this Jamie? Yeah. Okay. Jamie previously worked for a rape crisis center, child advocacy center in Florida. We had a difficult time with collaboration from other agencies, and it was frustrating trying to assist our survivors when we had a difficult time receiving assistance from other agencies. Collaboration is so important and necessary in this field. So thank you for sharing that. It definitely does make your job harder when it is frustrating trying to, when you're having a difficult time receiving assistance. And if you'd like to share why you think that difficulty existed, I would love to hear that. If you care to share, that would be great. I'm gonna take a sip of water real quick. Okay, next slide, please. All right, The second thing in building that collaborative partnerships is reflect the demographics of your service area in your leadership and representing the need of impacted communities. So again, if you have, I'll just use the example I used last time. If you have people from Mandarin speaking communities, that's, you need to reflect that demographic in your leadership and representing that need, right? And these are things that are really important and are often acknowledged, but they're not always followed through with. So it's easier to center the folks that are always centered. And it takes a lot of, it can take a lot of effort to bring people to the table that need to be there. And especially in more rural areas, that is difficult. And we do acknowledge that, but this is something that is really, really important. We want to also go beyond the human trafficking label. Again, organizations that may not actively participate in the anti-trafficking movement, we need to be willing to reach out to folks that don't even know anything about human trafficking, but we're connecting with them because we know that they're important to the response. So our impacted communities represented on your team and at your table. Again, that's really important because who's going to advocate, for people people from their own communities are going to advocate best for people from their own communities, right? So that's why we need that voice. So create partnerships outside of your typical human trafficking crisis response network. And I say that a lot because we can tend to focus on crisis response that involves human trafficking instead of trafficking survivors that need services in other areas. So for instance, if you think of reentry programs in counties where folks are leaving jails or prisons and they are receiving services from reentry councils, the human trafficking community really does need to connect with those reentry councils because we're working oftentimes with the same survivors, and that network has a lot of expertise and a lot of service that we need to connect with. So but they're not necessarily talking about human trafficking, right? But we need to go outside that label. Okay, so just think also about who is most impacted and at risk for experiencing human trafficking, and think who is serving them, and that this is the list of people that you want to partner with. So for instance, if you know that there are homeless youth who are trafficked, who are being served by other organizations, so reach out to the youth serving organizations, folks that they're already working with. And this seems obvious, but it's not always intuitive, right? It's not always something that we move to because there's not always an immediate benefit. And again, it takes time to develop these relationships, but it's going to be worth it in the long run. All right, next slide, thank you. Third is identify and discuss the frameworks that are in your partnership. So identify, name, and discuss the different frameworks. And what I mean is we're all working from a framework or one or two frameworks. I mentioned earlier public health approach. And I also mentioned earlier criminal justice approach. So if your goal is investigation and prosecution, it's going to be, law enforcement, and the DA's office is going to be part of your response, right? And some folks may not even view any other response as a response to human trafficking because they're just focused on those successful prosecutions. You can look at it through a human rights lens, right? Where the individual agency is important and centered in each case. You can look at things through a, through a victim service approach, where you're just, you're meeting that need that that person is presenting with at the moment. So there's different frameworks that people are working from, and sometimes they really do clash. And talking about it helps a lot. So people are often frustrated with those coming with a criminal justice approach, or when you're on, a multidisciplinary team where there is a lot of law enforcement represented. People can be frustrated that they're always talking about their case and their investigation, and bringing to the table, the problematic relationships with other folks in the community, and that making an impact and causing tension as well. But when you do understand, when we can understand that they are coming from that framework and we can talk about it, we can interact with, say, an investigator, like, I understand this is what you're doing for your case. I understand that you have a lot invested, but please understand that our client does not want those, does not want to cooperate with the investigation, because we are focusing on meeting them where they are and responding to the need that they are currently presenting to us, right? So those are important things as well. So just understanding the goals and objectives different agencies have, and talking about it and understanding why we might clash at times can really help in talking about it before the clash happens, if that makes sense. So you're discussing how you're, where you do align and where you're going to have different perspectives. So that can help as well. Be familiar with and stay updated with referral protocols and processes with your partnership organizations. So this will help, instead of one person in an agency that knows the other person in another agency really well, and they just call them on their cell phone, and they're the only ones that they call. And I've seen this happen a lot, and it can be really problematic, and they don't want to take the time to know the referral protocols, to know, look, I'm not on call right now. There's a crisis line. That's the call you're supposed to make. It's really helpful to have those boundaries with each other. Like, I know you'd rather just text me, but I'm not working right now, or I'm doing something else. So call the office number, call the front desk, or whatever. Call the person that's on call. So we want to really to be familiar with those protocols and processes and respect them. And again, it takes time, and we want to understand and learn from each other. So these are great things to do at if you do meet together. It's really important to have those, bring the forms and have like a 5-minute presentation of, this is how referrals are made to this organization or for our organization, and be transparent about that. That's really important. Transparency is always important in building relationships, and especially when some people are not respecting the boundaries of others, it's important to bring that into the space as well. Let's see. And then be aware of power dynamics and how they impact collaboration. So, for instance, racism is something that's, that occurs everywhere, but it is rarely named in the situation. It is rarely called attention to. It's rarely discussed, and it's something that we have to be willing to do that. And allies need to be the ones that are doing the heavy lifting on calling that out when we do see it, and when we do see other power dynamics that are making an impact. So who's taking up all the space in the room? Who does not have a voice, or who's not using their voice? Who's really making all the decisions? Are we practicing a savior complex? Is it all up to us? Is it all up to one agency? Are the decisions for the good of one person, or for the good of everyone? Are they being made for the good of the survivor, or does it all depend on me, as I said earlier? So these are really important. And I you know, in my own work, you have to decide, is it more helpful to bring it up in the moment, or, it might be helpful to have side conversations first. Like, look, I noticed that this, so-and-so and these folks never speak and you're always talking. And I think it's great, but they have important things to say too. I mean, I think you need to be more aware of that. And so maybe a private conversation is more effective. And then if it doesn't stop, bring in more people. But we have to be willing to have that, because that is going to impact the way survivors are served. That is going to impact who is heard and who shares that power and who does not. We want to be doing our work from a social justice framework. Okay, next slide. All right, so we're going to do a little bit of application, talking about victim response and service coordination. So if you can think of some examples that you have experienced where this has been very effective, and I can share one in talking about collaboration. So there was a young man from outside of the US who was trafficked and being served by another organization, and they were moving. They needed some housing options. So this was from a different part of the state, and we were able to provide. My organization was able to provide a home through a host family. So this was something we had where people could choose to stay with a family that was trained and had been vetted and everything. And this worked out really great. And our organization, we said that we would oversee the housing situation, and we would provide some clothing and some groceries. And then the other agency did everything else. They coordinated all the other services for this young person. They were not a minor, but I call them young because maybe I'm old. What we did is that a person from that organization would come over and meet the survivor, every few weeks. And then we would do check-ins with this person, the survivor, every week. And then these two service organizations communicated a lot. There was very clear communication with the survivor, to all of us together, and it worked really, really well. And so this person was able to have a very safe, positive situation with the host family while their other needs were getting met. Eventually, they got their visa, which was great, and then they were able to work and make money for themselves. So we played a very small part, but a very important part. And one of the things that was successful about that was we didn't try to take over. We didn't try, we were very content in just meeting that one need and staying in that lane. And there's always going to be tensions. Survivors will sometimes try to triangulate. Like if they're not happy with one person, they might complain to the other person. And what we had to work very hard to communicate all together. There's always going to be issues where people are getting frustrated, things aren't moving fast enough, and the way people respond can cause difficulty. And so we just had to work very hard to respect and believe the best about each other. And so if we did hear a complaint, we would just talk about it very openly. And that was and then just keeping each other accountable. Like, you're not going to be successful in like dividing us, right? So that was really, really great. And I look back at that as one of my favorite examples of collaboration, particularly in two service organizations that, we understood our lanes and we were happy to stay there. So that's one. If you all want to share in the chat an example that you all have I'd be happy to hear that. Another example, you know, where there was a mom with some kids who had come out of a trafficking situation, and this person was starting from ground zero with almost every single thing. And it required, because of the extensive need and because of the needs of the children, it required all hands on deck. I mean, I think like literally every agency, you know, in the area was involved, and it was very, very difficult. It was very difficult because you're talking about foster care, you're talking about, you know, all the child service organizations, you're talking about schools, you're talking about healthcare professionals, criminal justice system, you know, so it was very challenging. But the collaboration and I will say one thing that I was told about this is like, wow, we had no idea trafficking could be so complicated or complex, and our cases aren't all like that. So I would say this is probably the hardest case that I've worked through, but it was really good because some of the dynamics that you would try to train on, people saw for themselves, and it created more buy-in from the community. So, and of course the collaboration happens when you have when consent has been given, and that kind of thing. So, but it was very, very hard. But I tell you, if it had all been on our organization to do this, we would not have lasted. It would have taken up all our time, and it would have taken up all our emotional strength, right? So the fact that it was shared was very, very helpful for us to be sustainable in the work. So that was a little long, but I wanted to give you those examples as, you know, examples of collaboration. So next slide, please. So what do you consider to be essential partnerships? And I would love for you all to just add some things in the chat. I won't call, you know, I'll just name them as you put them in. When we're talking about human trafficking, who are the essential partnerships? And you can think of specifically in your community. Who would you say? Awesome, thank you. So schools, definitely, yeah, we're thinking about prevention and intervention. So schools, who else? Rape crisis centers, yes, absolutely. We say social workers, DSS, hospitals, healthcare, health clinics, youth serving organizations, shelter housing programs. Awesome. Yes. Your local housing authority is going to be a very important partnership. Yep. Domestic violence agencies, homeless outreach programs, LGBTQ plus youth services. Thank you for saying that. I was hoping y'all would bring that up. Yeah. First responders, the ER nurses. I said healthcare clinics. Law enforcement is going to be involved. Criminal justice system, DA's office, defense attorneys, because with HT, you know, a lot of the survivors are justice involved. They're not, yeah, many are incarcerated or are reentrants. So the jails, juvenile justice, DSS, I said, child advocacy centers, local health department. Excellent. Yes. Those serving the Latinx community, trauma-informed therapists, absolutely. Boys and Girls Club, YMCA, youth development centers. And then ones that you may not think of, like I said, the reentry councils, There's other, family justice centers, anyone in the family, legal services, immigration services, legal aid, career centers. Yes, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, any kind of shelter, any kind of street outreach, needle exchanges, if there's any kind of sex worker groups in your area, that's an important group to be a part of as well. Okay, great. If you can think of others, I'd love for you to hear them. I'd love to hear them. And the faith-based communities can be really, really helpful. They are amazing as far as funding, raising funds, and raising awareness, but also providing specific things that you might need request. Career centers. Oh yeah, Alcoholics Anonymous and NA programs. Absolutely. Your any kind of treatment facilities, your detox facilities, residential treatment facilities, your adult protective services. Absolutely, there are adults that are labor trafficked, adults in care facilities, group homes for youth and adults as well. Awesome. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. So you can keep adding them. All right, let's go on to the next one. This is features of collaborative partnerships. So what makes a collaborative partnership successful? And I'd love for you all to add as we go through these and comment. So the first one is going to be, you're going to have a specific vision or specific mission that's going to be shared. And you don't even have to have the same framework. You can, but you can align on having the same mission. So that's going to be one feature that, and hopefully everyone in the group will be able to, will know what that is. Because if they don't know what it is, then that's on the list for you to work on. Want to think about having shared leadership. So this is versus a top-down approach. So different people, if you have partnerships where there are meetings, you want to have different folks leading the meeting, different people that are not just leading the meeting, that are are taking leadership responsibilities. You want to have regular communication. You can go overboard with this and go email crazy. That's not what we're talking about, but you can have meetings that, you don't need to meet all the time. Certainly nobody wants another meeting that they don't need to be at. So finding that sweet spot where, it's just enough communication, just enough meeting to get the work done, but it's not too far apart where you've sort of lost any kind of momentum. So people like monthly, quarterly is really good. If you make the meeting, if everyone makes the meeting worth going to, a good 1.5 hour quarterly meeting can be really great. Specifically, if you have training opportunities in those meetings. When I did local work, we had a quarterly meeting where we just it wasn't really an empty team, but it was just an invitation for everyone to come just to see what's going on about human trafficking in the community. And our board members would come, and if it was a spring, summer, fall, winter meeting, and we would have I'd give like a presentation about what we've been doing, and if anyone wanted to learn, there was always people wanting to learn more about human trafficking. We could just invite them to that meeting, and it was just a stated standard time, and we know that we could have folks who wanted to get involved, and we would ask people from other agencies to come and do a little presentation on what they do. Like we had someone from the local police agency on the gang unit come and talk about the intersections of gangs and human trafficking, and he gave like a 15-minute presentation, and it was really great. And different people from the DA would show up sometimes, and Whoever was running for office might show up, but it was just a standing meeting that was real, and it was nice, and it would have been ridiculous if it was every week or every month. So you want to do what's going to work for you, what's going to keep that momentum. Have a two-way learning community, cross-train regularly. Don't think of staff training as something you do once a year, or we did that training one time. Meetings are a great way to learn from one another. And just because you've been meeting for or known each other for like years, don't think you know everything about the DA's office or the, social services. And it's really great to learn about processes. And the more we know about how an agency works, the more we'll understand how best to interact with them and how best to collaborate. So, learning about processes in the agency is really important. So I encourage that. So cultural competency is absolutely important, especially reflecting, again, the demographics of your service area. So we want to know, and I'll give an example of one situation where there was a survivor from China, and the person was calling someone aunt and uncle, i.e. and shushu. And it was kind of fun. It wasn't funny, but because the detectives thought, or at least some of them thought, they're definitely trafficked because she's calling them aunt and uncle. They're not even her aunt and uncle. Well, that person didn't know that that is a term of respect. Or when you know someone closely, you will call them aunt and uncle. It doesn't mean that I'm actually, but because they didn't know that part about Chinese culture, they were assuming criminality. They were assuming that person was lying. That was kind of important. So I was able to explain, no, this means they're close to them. So that's an example. I mean, that's one small example, but it's really, really important that we understand the cultures around us. And then again, understanding the needs of historically underserved or marginalized populations, and not just understanding the needs, but knowing in meaningful ways. And again, we want to make sure that we are inclusive of those populations. And if we do ask someone from other communities and other cultures or other backgrounds to come and speak or share or train, we want to make sure we're compensating people for that. But that's essential in our collaboration. Okay, next slide. And again, we want to anticipate pressure points, discussing, thinking where do we normally disagree? And how do we want to handle those disagreements, or do we want to handle that tension or that controversy, instead of in the moment being, so angry and frustrated that everybody shuts down, but speaking it ahead of time. Maybe it's something that keeps showing up, right? And we want to know how to talk about it. That's really, really important, to talk about how you're going to handle them. How as a group is best to handle these things? Do we do the one-on-one first, or do we bring it into the whole entire group? Things like that. The other thing is, let's think about having a procedure or a process for inviting and including other people into the group. Maybe everyone decides we all want a voice about who can be invited or how they're going to be invited. I don't know. Just that's a helpful thing, because you don't want it to stay static. You want your partnerships to always be growing. And of course, here I'm kind of assuming there's some sort of meeting, some sort of communication that's happening regularly. And then how are you going to evaluate or assess how you're doing? How is the group working? Are you doing case reviews or hypotheticals or process reviews? Do you go over a case and how everyone responded? And is there an evaluation of that process? of that response. Do you want to pull out the protocol and say, do we need to make adjustments in the protocol, or we need to adhere more closely to the protocols? So how are you going to do that assessment and that evaluation of your program or your collaborative partnerships? And I want to mention that these 3 features here are really only going to work well where there is emotional safety, where there's inclusion and equity. These are kind of your high level, at least I look at it as, this is, if there's a lot of power dynamics going on, a lot of tension in your group, that these 3 things are probably not going to, they might happen, but they're not going to happen well. Especially if only a few people in the team has real power. So we want to make sure, and you know, to be realistic, we're in local communities. We know that there are agencies that show up a certain way almost all the time, right? And it's not easy to change that, if it's even possible to change that. So we understand that there are things about your community that are going to be really difficult, where there is overt racism, where there is overt misogyny, where there is overt transphobia. And but we still want to seek to make those changes. And I have found, and I realize that I am white, that I realize that I have a certain amount of privilege that can be leveraged, and so I leveraged it. But there are many times where I was in situations where, you know, people would say certain things or act a certain way, and, you know, it was really awful. And I, on more than one occasion, would just ask, you know, to talk privately with someone and just really say, look, I get why y'all are doing this. I don't like it, but here's what you need to understand. This is how it's impacting this person or that person or this survivor. And instead of, you know, I just found that speaking to people privately was so helpful and went a long way. And when I did that, they would usually be quicker to listen to me because I was willing to listen to them. And so that was very helpful in developing those partnerships. But so I tried very hard to work with people as sincerely and transparently as possible. And if they knew that I liked them and I could be mad at them, then that relationship will last. Like, look, I know, you know, I love you, but I am really mad at you right now. I really disagree how you're handling this, or, you know, whatever. Usually it was with law enforcement and sometimes social workers, but it was, you know, having that respect and that two-way communication was really helpful. So, okay, next slide. Questions in closing. So we have a couple of minutes left. If you all would, you can write to just the panelists. If you have any questions, any specific situations you'd like to talk about, this is the time to share them. Do you have what questions do you have about building, improving the collaborative partnerships in your area? Or share what you've done. Going forward from this training, what things have come to mind that you would like to change or you would like to see happen in your community? And it can be very basic. Basic is good. And hopefully you have at least one takeaway. Madison, you're certainly welcome to.
I was just going to add, I also think it's important to acknowledge how the nature of collaboration has changed in light of the last year, in light of us all experiencing this pandemic, and how maybe our processes for collaboration or the ways in which we can offer services have changed. And so maybe in creating collaborations, keeping in mind that they have to be flexible, and allowing conversations that allow you to adapt based on how collaboration has to adapt to change to the time that we're in. And so also another question, if anyone feels free to answer, is how have your collaborative processes changed in the last year as a response to COVID-19, and how it's affected your services or your partnerships?
That's a great question. Thank you for adding that. It's almost gotten so normal, I'm sort of not thinking of it as unusual anymore. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, that would be great to hear. And I've heard from programs saying that it has impacted, like they haven't been able to build those relationships. And then I've also heard that some people have actually, because of the Zoom, more people have been able to participate and have been more engaged on Zoom because they're not because they just miss people. So I've heard both things, that it's been harder, but also it's been it's made things a little bit easier. What have you all experienced? Well, I think that we can, okay, yay. So definitely think Zoom video chat has made collaboration easier, interesting, and it's more accessible for those of us in this busy field to participate in meetings without having to account for travel time. That's, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I wonder going forward, is there going to be more, when we're back in person, is there going to be a hybrid, of in-person and Zoom, if that, the video conferencing will continue to be a thing? Yeah. It definitely, I know that I'm not as awkward on that as I used to be. So maybe others have felt the same where they wouldn't have participated before. Yeah. Anyone else? Thanks for sharing that. And I would love to hear anyone's takeaways, one thing they want to look at or focus on or think about as they move forward.
One takeaway that I've been thinking about as I apply to jobs is when I'm looking at different organizations or companies, looking at who they list on their website that they partner with, or what some of their vision and mission specific goals are. Just looking in where I see myself in my career, I think it's important to think preemptively, like how do they incorporate collaboration and partnership into their work, and see how that influences like my interest in their work and company.
That's a great point, Madison. I haven't thought about that. So so it's almost like you're looking to see how they are collaborating, and that helps us, to think how, not just how the survivor is served, but how others are, well, the survivors too can look at our websites and see who we're partnering with. And that's a big, and we'll see it, we'll see who's represented in those things too, right? When we talk about including different demographics, we can look at the pictures of the board members and, yeah, but that's a great point. And someone said, I like the Smarty goals. I've heard of SMART goals, but I like the addition of inclusive and equitable. Yeah, that's awesome. So we love the Resource the Management Center, and that's where the Smarty, that resource comes from. And that organization is, part of its mission is to make things inclusive and equitable. And that's, yeah, I'd encourage y'all to look at that website. But yeah, I'm so glad. Thank you for sharing that. And I think, and it's a great help to those who really haven't thought about how to make that happen, right? We know we need to make changes, but how to do that. So I think It's a great way to bring, to teach us, train us how to be more inclusive and equitable. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? I was reading something recently that had a lot of very interesting ideas about including people and excluding people based on what your assumptions, right? And it was it made, just the way the author posed things made me think about who I'm doing that to and with, and who I am overlooking because I just assume this. And it was really, really helpful. So I've been thinking myself about rethinking some of the things that I have been assuming about particular groups, particular organizations, just based on my own personal bias, or because the way they handled themselves in the past about something. So I've been challenged in many ways to think of those things as well, and how I could be more inclusive. Yeah, just in some different areas, but yeah. So we really appreciate your participation, and here are our email addresses. And if you have questions about what we've covered here, or anything in any way that particularly that I can help you with, and any kind of technical assistance around these things, I'm very happy to do that, and looking forward to working with you. And thank you for attending the training.
And Courtney, thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge and experiences and collaboration in the field of anti-human trafficking work. You provide a lot of good thoughts and things that I think will be helpful for people to think about going forward.
Thank you, Madison. We all have a great week. Take care.